I want to welcome everybody to this very special episode of The American Idea. We're honored today to have with us the 70th Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo. Secretary Pompeo, thank you for joining us.
It's wonderful to be with you.
Mr. Secretary, you got started in your education at the United States Military Academy at West Point. How did West Point shape you going forward?
Oh my goodness, in so many ways. It both shaped me and created opportunities I would have never dreamed I could have had. I think of my education as actually beginning with my family, my parents, right? This was just an important part of me growing up. Maybe the most important thing they taught me was to work hard and that mattered, and that good things don't happen every day, but if you keep at it, they often will. That set me up for this place I had the chance to go to school, where I was surrounded by 1,000+ classmates, all of whom came from widely varied backgrounds, but there was an understanding of meritocracy that was really important. They taught the founding traditions of our country. They taught the importance of service to the nation, and then they taught us the hard skills,
right.
The math, the reading, and the history, all that goes as part of that. It has absolutely shaped the way I think about America and the way I think about the obligation for each of us to try and serve in a way that benefits others as well.
From there, of course, you went on to serve in the United States military. What's a lesson that you picked up from your time in the U.S. military?
Oh goodness, there's so many. I'll start with the one I got just at the very beginning. So you're a brand new second lieutenant. I showed up in my first assignment. I was the second platoon leader for a Bravo troop of the 1st Squadron, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, right? I'd been to the basic course, and I showed up in my unit, and there was a man named Sergeant First Class Pretry. He would have probably been 16, 18-year non-commissioned officer. So I show up, the unit was in the field training. It was a tank unit. We had 113s and M1 tanks. And show up at the unit, walk up to Sergeant First Class Pretry. He saluted. I was the senior person, but he knew a lot more than I did. And he said, "Lieutenant, you'll do really well if you'll just shut up for a while." And the truth is, the lesson for me was listening is important. The capacity to take on information, to absorb, to not always be pushing to talk, to be prepared to listen, to take others' ideas. In the end, in that unit, I was responsible for its successes and its failures. I was a lieutenant, the senior member of the unit, but I benefited enormously from that. What I think he meant in a little bit in jest and a little bit with seriousness, and I've tried to take that on to this day to make sure that I listen to lots of different voices, lots of different people around me as I try to form good judgments on how to make decisions.
Out of the military, then, of course, you go into private industry, and then into Congress, representing Kansas's 4th district in Congress. In Congress, it's very easy, I think, for members of Congress to sort of calculate what their interests are. But some congressmen, yourself included, became known as people who really tried to stand on principle. What basic principles guided you as a member of Congress?
So, there I guess 3 sources for those principles that sort of lead to them. The first is my faith. You can't separate that. I get asked all the time, how are you a Christian and a congressman? The answer is, well, I was elected to Congress, but I've been a Christian since I came to know the Lord, and they're inseparable. That certainly drives the way, that informs my value set. So when you think of principles, that understanding, the Christian understanding of America and the world and of human dignity certainly informed it. Second, I was elected by the people of South Central Kansas. They had a decided view on how congressmen ought to vote, how they ought to think about the world. It was a get out of my way, leave us alone, small government mindset. Ag and energy were important, manufacturing. We made airplanes in Wichita, Kansas. And so those issues were a priority. And so when you boil them down to principles, it's an understanding of the American economy and how it works and how risk takers should be rewarded. And when you do that, communities are better off and families are better off. And then the last piece just comes from the life that I had led before that. So even when I was in Congress, my wife and I still tried our best to be involved in lots of things. We love Wichita State University basketball. We were still involved in our church at Eastminster Presbyterian. So the way one incorporates one's principles and understandings across all of the places one finds themselves in life. None of us have just one role.
Right.
I was a dad, I was a husband, all of those things. I think those principles play out across those as well.
In Congress, you were sometimes known to be willing to buck your party leaders if they pushed policies that you did not agree with. Why is that?
It is interesting. It's true. In the end, you are a member. You were elected to do the things that you believe are right and then explain them to the constituents you represent, and they get to either send you back or send you home. And so I always tried to honor that every way that I could. Sometimes party leadership would just have a different view. The party would be in a different place than me. During my time, they often wanted to spend more than I wanted to spend.
You were known as a fiscal hawk.
We were trying to keep money in the hands of families in Kansans. Frankly, not very successfully. But that was the biggest conflict I had with the Republican leadership, is it too wanted to grow government, maybe just a little bit slower than the other party did. And I thought we could do better than that.
When President Trump was elected, of course, you became director of the CIA. I think a lot of people who work for the CIA, of course, are often shrouded in secrecy. From your experience, tell us about the men and women who serve the United States in the CIA.
Yeah, they're amazing. What a crazy privilege I had to be able to lead those men and women. In some ways, it was like my time in military service. The CIA officers who are the operators, there's analysts and operators, but the operators, the folks who are out collecting intelligence, a lot of veterans from the United States military service, and the mindset is the same. Work hard, focus on the mission, deliver outcomes, measure, fix what got wrong, and go after it again. It was a mindset that I knew well. They often work in very difficult places, very dark space. They'll never be able to march in a parade like a soldier can. They'll never get rewarded when a bad day happens and one of them is injured or, heaven forbid, killed on an assignment. It's often not known. It is a difficult life, but a rewarding life, and they are remarkable people who I saw I was only there 18 months, but who I saw in my 18 months save countless American lives.
You became, of course, then 70th United States Secretary of State. In your time as Secretary of State, the United States faced many foreign policy challenges. If you could pick one, and maybe it's not fair, but if you could pick one, what would be, in your opinion, the greatest challenge you faced as Secretary of State?
The greatest challenge that we began to confront, we didn't get all the way done with this, was the challenge presented by the Chinese Communist Party. There is only a single threat that can truly change the way we live here in America. I think the Taliban, I spent time with the Taliban are bad. I spent time with Vladimir Putin, he's bad. I spent a lot of time with Chairman Kim in North Korea, bad. But the only one with an economy of 1.4 billion people, an economy of our scale, and the intention of undermining the idea of Western civilization, they are indeed the greatest threat to us, and they were the constant challenge during my time as both CIA Director and Secretary of State.
What do you think the prospects are for confronting that challenge? What do you think the United States needs to do to effectively confront the challenge of the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, it's a long answer because it's a complicated problem set and at scale. But two ideas. The first is we have to recognize the problem. The first step of every 12-step program is acknowledging that you've got to fix it. And I think we're now there. I think the American people now can see that the Chinese Communist Party built its economy on the backs of the American worker for 40 years. And even here in a place like Ohio, I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of Ohio jobs destroyed because we let them steal our intellectual property, study at our universities, steal our stuff. It's been a one-way transfer of human capital that is unrivaled in all of history. And so the first thing I would say is you have to solve the problem that is the problem here inside the gates, inside the country, what it is the Chinese Communist Party is doing. We often think about it, go fight in Beijing or Taiwan. The first thing is you have to protect the American people from the threat here in the homeland. The second thing we have to do is acknowledge that we're going to need friends and partners in this. So the United States will lead it. It's the way the world sits today. And that's a good thing. I don't mean that it's just, well, darn it, it's going to have to be us. We're going to have to go do this. It's a good thing. We want America to be that global leader. But we'll need the Japanese, the Australians, the South Koreans, the Europeans. We will need the Indians all to come to have our shared understanding of this threat. And when we do, when they can see that their people will be worse off if they become a vassal state of China, then I'm confident we'll get it right. We'll solve this. We'll move our way forward. There'll be costs. There'll be bad days. But it will have been a worthy undertaking, and the United States will have saved itself and the Western order in a way that will matter for the next generation and the generation after it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, of course, given your time in Director of the CIA and Secretary of State, think about Mike Pompeo, and they think about foreign policy and confronting intelligence and foreign threats. But from your time in Congress, you also had a deep concern with education, in particular what you saw as federal overreach and intrusion on education. And now you've turned to talking quite a bit publicly about the importance of civic education, of the education of citizens, especially young people. Why has civic education become so important to you?
It's what you all do here, right? So the greatest, when I answered your question, you asked me what the greatest threat from outside the country was. The greatest threat from inside the country is we forget about the American founding. Or worse yet, we teach something about it which is blatantly untrue, right? We teach that we were founded on racist ideas. We teach that somehow it was property holders abusing another class. This was a founding of a nation that is unequaled in all of human history. And you can't survive. America, the America I love and know, and that has given me so much, can't survive without that civic understanding, the need for decency and respect, for virtue, and for recognition of the Judeo-Christian heritage that our founders understood so well. They provided the structure for us, but they reminded us all the time. You can go read the Federalist Papers. Right. They reminded us all the time that this was a nation built on people of virtue. And if you walk away from that, it doesn't work. And so we need to make sure that in our homes, in our schools, K through 12, colleges, every place that Americans gather knowledge, we need to be very clear about the greatness, the exceptionalness of this nation. We're happy to talk about all the problems. We got many. There's lots of things we could do better. I've got ideas. You'd have them. But in the end, this is a place that has been a force for good for not only the people of the United States of America, but for the human dignity of so many others all across the globe.
Right. And as you suggest, we can't forget the founders called America an experiment.
Yes. Right. Franklin said, I gave you a republic. See what y'all can do with it. That's my Kansas. That's my Kansas shorthand for what he described. Exactly.
Well, of course, as you said, Ashbrook has been in the business of educating Americans in the history and principles of our country since 1983, when we were founded by Ronald Reagan. We always like to ask our guests here on The American Idea their favorite person in American history.
Yeah, it's always hard to pick one. It would be too easy to pick President Reagan. He was my commander-in-chief when I came out of West Point.
It's a good choice for Ashbrook.
But I'm happy to go back even further. When you think of someone like George Washington and the idea of public service, I read a work about Martha the other day and the sacrifices that she made to allow her husband to go serve in these roles where, and you know, I think about it, I was a congressman, I flew back and forth home, my wife was in Kansas. It was hard, right? There was no way for President Washington or General Washington to get back home. He would get to see his family only on the rarest of occasions. They made this enormous sacrifice. And then when the time came where he could have been declared king or emperor or ruler or whatever the heck he wanted, he said, no, I want America to be different from that. I want it not to be ruled but governed. And that's pretty darn special.
Yeah, an amazing statesman.
Truly remarkable.
Yeah.
You can't hope to emulate. You can only hope to be inspired.
Well, it's a choice I agree with. I have a bust of General Washington on my desk.
Very nice. All right, I got it right. Jeff, thank you.
Secretary Pompeo, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be with you.
Thank you.